Today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast is a crossover with Parker from Locked On Coogs to talk about Marcus Sasser's role with the Detroit Pistons this upcoming season, what to expect from him. Hope you guys enjoy it. Coming up on Locked On Pistons podcast.
Houston Cougar fan favorite Marcus Sasser is in Detroit. And aside from a big coach, we're going to figure out what all he needs to be successful.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a crossover edition of Locked On Cougs and Pistons. I'm one of your hosts, Parker Ainsworth. I'm joined by Kook Kahil. Kook, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Appreciate you having me on. It's going to be an interesting episode.
I'm excited because, first of all, I'm an NBA fan at heart. First love kind of stuff from back in the 90s, back when the Rockets were really good. And honestly, I'm excited to talk about Marcus because Marcus is kind of a fan favorite in Houston. To all Locked On Coogs folks at home that want to hear about his year in Houston, his entire rookie season all the way throughout, I'm sure they'll be quick to go over and hit subscribe on Locked On Pistons as well. But Koo, talk to me about what kinds of questions do you all have, or do people have in general, about Marcus Sasser in Detroit? Like, what kinds of things are people asking about?
So there were a few questions that I had immediately about Marcus Sasser when they drafted him at 25. So I'm not much of a college basketball guy. I don't get into college basketball until, I don't get into college basketball, but I get into scouting some guys when I know where the Pistons are selecting. I look at the guys around that area. I start scouting some of those guys. So that's like what I do in the off season. So I don't know much about college basketball really. So Sasser wasn't really on my radar at all. So when they drafted him, obviously the Pistons have quite a few guards. So my question immediately was, how much on ball does Marcus Sasser, how much does he have of that in his arsenal? When I say on ball, not so much just as an on ball scorer, but like running an offense, creating for others, playmaking, or is he more of a off ball kind of guy who plays next to a guy who creates for the offense?
And so it kind of been interesting to watch that change over his career. I would argue he's been successful doing both things. In his earlier parts of his career, he played with like Nate Hinton and Quentin Grimes and had a lot more of the traditional point guard type duties. And that team ended up in the Final Four, right? Quentin Grimes is obviously really good, and Nate Hinton had some shots in the pro. They had a forward named DeJon Jarreau who's been in and out of the league a little bit, at that fringe. But I would say that was when you saw more of the I'm going to run the offense and I'll shoot. I think he had 8 points a game or that. Wasn't really his primary role. And then they added Jamal Shead, who is a more traditional point guard and is one of the more highly touted point guards coming back to college basketball next season. But he's like a 6'1", more traditional, true point guard, right? And so Marcus then moved to the 2 guard. And it's not that Marcus is a giant, right? I think they list him at 6'3", something like that. But in the last couple of seasons, he's been a true 2 guard, off the ball, running off the screens. He can initiates offense, right? If it's his turn to run the pick and roll or pick and pop or come across the double drag or what have you. But he really is more of a scorer in the last couple of seasons, to the extent that Kelvin Sampson will ever have a true scorer, right? He's more of a, evenly distributed kind of shots guy. But, and so I guess that would be kind of the way that's been malleable or changed up over time. I would say with how many creators Detroit has, and we'll get more into how he fits in exactly. That's my question for you later. He can be a guy that's more of a true off-the-ball shooter and scorer, though, if need. I think that's a fairly easy transition for him as a guy that shoots, what was it? His junior season, it was 44, but he shoots over 38% from 3, right?
Yeah, and I saw a lot of stats talking about how good of a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter he is. And where he ranked amongst college basketball, I know was pretty high, and that's in that regard as well. So that was the immediate question I had about him, because we're going to talk about a little later, I wanted to find out where they were planning on fitting him in the backcourt. The other question I have about Marcus Sasser is this. So he was a 4-year college basketball player, and he's 22 years old right now, and the Pistons are a really young team. He's already older than Jane Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Killian Hayes, Jalen Duren. He's already a lot older, not a lot older, but older than a lot of the Pistons young guys. So the other question I had was with them hiring Monty Williams and bringing in a little bit more vets, seeming like they want to try to win a little bit more this year. Him being a 4-year guy, is he a guy that should be expected as a 4-year guy, 22-year-old coming into the NBA that's ready now and ready to impact at the NBA level immediately? Because a lot of guys you see like early on that are younger, they're a little bit more like projects have to develop and stuff like that. If you stay in college longer, as someone who doesn't watch college basketball a lot, I'd assume that he's a player that you would say probably is more ready to impact at the NBA immediately. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think that honestly, yes, I do. I think that a year ago he was tracking to be a first round draft pick after his junior season, but he only ended up playing 12 games. He hurt his shoulder, and he went to and did the combine stuff in whatever that is in May and early June after his junior season, and did the deal where like you get some notes and they send you back to college, or they say you can go back to college, whatever. And he came back and worked on some things. I'd imagine had he been healthy his junior season, the notes would have said, you're a first round pick and come on. But I guess he was a late first round pick this year, so maybe I'm wrong there. But I think he's ready to impact though, because he's not going to be the liability on defense outside of being 6'2", 6'3", right? Because I guess in some degree in the NBA that can make you a liability. But as far as being a 6'2", 6'3" kind of shooting guard, I don't know there's any other liability about him on defense. He's a very, very tenacious defender. Like he's eager to get into passing lanes. Kelvin Sampson, head coach at Houston, is a big time proponent of like defense first. You'll see them running. This is the Pistons fans might get this, but the Cougars fans are laughing with me. They run incredibly simple offensive sets for the first like 6 weeks of the year because they like don't practice it. like they straight up, they're working on every type of pick and roll coverage, every type of pick and pop. They're ready for like all these different situations. They focus on defense so much that they don't really put in difficult or formal offense until late December sometimes. I say that to say, like, I would imagine that makes him ready to, like, you won't worry about him defensively as long as it's not a bad matchup for a 6'3" guy. And admittedly, like Cade Cunningham's a point guard at 6'6", right? There could be a bad matchup for a 6'3" guy out there, I guess, right?
So I guess my last question would be, do you believe he's actually 6'3"? Because watching him in summer league, he looked a lot, to my eye, he looked a lot smaller than 6'3". I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I thought he looked smaller than 6'3".
Well, the point guard Jamal Shead I mentioned earlier, he's lined up with at Houston, is listed at 6'1" on the same places where Marcus is listed at 6'3", and they look 2 inches apart. That might mean Jamal Shead is not 6'1", but I do think they look about 2 inches apart. I think that Marcus has crazy long arms, though, and so it does make up some. And so if he is 6'1" and change or something like that, I don't know that it impacts it a whole lot. He'll have trouble covering your 6'7s because 6'7" is a lot taller than even 6'3", right? But he might be fibbing a little bit there. That's fair.
Now, the reason why I ask is because after the Pistons drafted him, I went and talked with some of the draft people that I trust and asked, hey, what's this guy about? Like, why did he go at 25? Because a lot of people, as soon as the Pistons drafted him, I saw a lot of people talking about how great he is as a shooter and a scorer, and he can do all that stuff. So I'm like, okay, so why did he fall? And a lot of the things I got back was there were some concerns about how tall he is and how much he'll be able to impact as like an off-ball player, off-ball guard at his size. But kind of not to go too long into this, but I just thought like the immediate comparison I thought of, a little bit better, a better scorer than this guy, but kind of the same role as like a Davion Mitchell with the Kings, a guy who plays off-ball with another guard, really good point of attack defender. And then Sasser, as you saw him score like 40 points in the final summer league game, and as a lot of your guys, a lot of your listeners probably saw at Houston, is probably a better scorer than you think Davion Mitchell is. So that's kind of like the comp I got after listening. So I wonder if that's something that your listeners how they feel about me saying that. Before we continue on with today's episode, I got to tell you guys about today's sponsor of the podcast, FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel. Get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe and secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And they got more than just MLB on there. Last season, I was on there all season with the NBA, especially towards the end of the year, taking the over on Jane Ivey's assist and points when he started to heat up. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball.
Davion Mitchell will be interesting in role for sure. And I want to transition to the second segment a little bit and talk actually about that role. And I think we're going to get to cover both those things in that. But Davion Mitchell, I think, is interesting because his role is like he's not like the star backcourt player in Sacramento by any stretch, right? But he is important to what they do. I kind of always thought, since watching Marcus for 4 years now, that he would be that kind of important, even if he wasn't a starter. Like the way Fred VanVleet used to be a 6-man kind of guy in Toronto. Admittedly, he's heading to Detroit, where there are a lot of guards. You mentioned Cunningham, Ivey. I would count Asar Thompson as a guard. I guess that's probably positionless basketball. Killian Hayes, I kind of forget is on that roster. That's a lot of guys with G's next to their name that are admittedly all much bigger than Marcus Sasser. We talk about size and the matchup problems that could present. Every team needs shooting, but where do you think that Marcus fits into that matrix? Because that is a lot of backcourt depth.
It's going to be incredibly interesting because I'm not sure how he's going to fit immediately, which is why when they immediately drafted him, there were some questions from some people in the Pistons community about, okay, why was this the pick? Because the Pistons' biggest weakness has been their wing room. I called it the worst wing room in the entire NBA this past season. I thought it was really bad. And they went out there, and Asar is a playmaking type of wing. He can slide up. That kind of like the positionless basketball you were talking about. He can slide up from 1, 2, 3 to 4. But he's going to be playing the wing for the Pistons, so they got that there. I thought once they traded up, I thought, okay, they're going to go after another wing here to kind of fix up the wing room. So they went with another guard. And the immediate questions were, okay, how is he going to fit then? Because you got Cade, you got Jay and Ivey. You also had, at the time, Killian Hayes and Alec Burks. And then after they drafted Sasser, they then traded for Monty Morris, which adds another guard to the rotation. So now it's like, okay, you got Cade, Jaden, Killian, Burks, Monty, and Sasser. That's 6 guards right there. And all 6 of those guys want to play minutes. Killian Hayes, I expect to be traded. I'm higher on Killian Hayes. I'm one of those Killian Hayes believers, but I expect him to be moved to a different situation because I don't think he's going to be able to beat out any of the guys the Pistons have currently on the squad. And even if you did, you don't trade for Monty Morris to not play him. You don't keep Alec Burks to not play him. So I don't think anyone should be concerned about how Killian Hayes affects Marcus Sasser. I don't think he's going to be on the roster. And if he is, he'll just be depth. Sasser it's going to be tough for him to crack the rotation immediately, I think, because of Cade and Jaden obviously having the first 2 spots. And then bringing in Monty Morris, they wanted to get a backup point guard that brought some stability and steady leadership kind of role. And Monty, I believe, averaged like 0.0 turnovers this past year. So he doesn't turn the ball over a ton. He's not going to do anything flashy. He's not going to go out there and score 30 points or anything, but he's a good shooter. He's going to play efficient basketball. And he's not going to do anything he can't do. He's just going to he's going to play the right way, whatever. Like he's not going to be the reason why you lose a game, basically. So that's what they wanted versus what they had last year. So I figure that Sasser is going to be fighting with Burks for minutes. And what gets interesting with fighting with Burks for minutes is that I thought throughout the offseason that they were going to try to trade Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, that is, to create room for guys that they want to get minutes. Because then you could trade Burks and Bojan, maybe you'll get a starting 4. And now you got Isaiah Stewart as the backup 4. You got minutes for Isaiah Livers at the 3. Then you can play Sasser at the 2, and then Monty at 1. But it doesn't look like they actually are going to do that. So, I mean, they haven't done it thus far, and I assume that they probably aren't going to move off of them because they've been in the rumors about trading Bojan for, it feels like, over a year now, and they've yet to do it. So I just assume they're just not going to. So without making a move, the only way I could see Sasser getting minutes out the gate is if he like outplays Burks. And I feel like that's going to be tough to do as a 22-year-old versus like where Burks is a really good vet that I think could play for like a contender off the bench too. So, I mean, and then also it's positionless basketball, like you said. So it could get interesting. Maybe Monty runs out there Monty Williams, that is. Maybe Monty Williams runs out Monty Morris, Burks, Sasser with Asar and Dern or something. Maybe we get some crazy lineups like that or something. But outside of that, it's going to be tough to see how he gets minutes initially without a trade happening somehow.
Well, and Monty Williams adds an interesting element to this because in a vacuum, I think Monty Williams is a great coach for Marcus. He's an older school guy, but Marcus is a little more of a leader on the floor, and I think those guys will mesh well. Monty is not afraid to play two small guards. We saw him do it with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. He's not afraid of those kinds, like having a shorter two guard like Book. Book's a little bit bigger than Marcus, but it's just interesting, like that. I think in a vacuum that's a good fit, but then I'm looking at the roster you're saying, and I'm like, unless they move. I didn't know who they'd pair with Bogdanovich. I figured they have to pair somebody young with Bogdanovich to get him out of town. That's a pretty big price tag on Bojan. I assumed that there'd be a crunch of minutes there. Talk to me. You're saying you're putting a lot of stock into Burks. Is Burke? I wouldn't have known that as a non-Pistons guy. What does Burks do well? And then are there things that, now that you've seen Marcus play some summer league ball, are there things that Burks and Marcus, like, are they like the same player, different players, that kind of stuff?
So with Burks, it's going to be tough for me to envision Sasser being better than Burks out the gate because, again, I think Burks is a player that if he wasn't on the Pistons, he could be playing for a contender off the bench and play a really good role. This is a guy who is really good at drawing free throws. Really, he's really savvy and creative with the way he draws free throws, gets guys, defenders in foul trouble. It makes it hard to guard him because he's always looking to fish like a foul on a jump shot or coming off a pick and roll. He knows how to absorb contact and create that. So it kind of keeps defenders off balance. Another 41% three-point shooter over the last 3 years. He shot 41% from deep. And then in New York, he was playing some point guard. Now, that's not what his role is. You don't want him really running point guard. It didn't look that great when he tried to do it in Detroit, but when he was playing off ball, he was fantastic for the Pistons. I believe his on-off splits as well offensively is the best on the team. I believe he has one of the best on-off net ratings on the team as well. When he was on the floor, the Pistons were just better with him on the floor because he's a really good scorer, knows how to play, really good shooter as well, so he can play next to the Pistons' main ball handlers like a Cade, like a Jay and Ivy, provide that spacing, while also providing some of that scoring as well, while not being a complete liability defensively. So I don't know. It's going to be, I feel like Sasser would basically be being asked to do the same thing Burks does if he were to play, which is why I think Burks is his competition. I don't think he's competing with Monty. I don't think they want him running point guard. I think they have three options they'd rather have run, like point, Cade, Burks, and then, or not Burks, Cade, Monty, and if Killian Hayes is still on the team, I think Killian Hayes will probably do a better job of running the offense. But as a scorer, off-ball guy can provide that gravity and shooting for their main guys. Sasser could do it. I just don't think they're going to do it have him do it over Burks at his age too. Like if Burks was a little bit older, like 34, 35 or something, then you could maybe try to convince him hey, we're not going to play you. We just want you to be a veteran kind of guy, and then we'll move you in a few months to a contender. We want your veteran leadership. Maybe if he was towards the end of his career a little bit more. But Burks is more so still in his prime. He's only 32 and still playing really good. So I doubt he'd be willing to accept less minutes for just another young guy. And also the Pistons hired Monty Williams. So I think that they're done with the hey, we're going to play a young guy because he's part of our future versus who's the best guy to be put on the floor right now. So I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough unless they get super creative with lineups, and they could, because Sasser provides that point of attack defensive ability and he doesn't need the ball in his hands offensively. He could provide that versatility, which does make it interesting. It's going to, I guess that's the best word. It'll be interesting to see how Monty Williams decides to shake the rotation, because it's not just the guard rotation that's crazy. It's like the whole roster. Like you don't know what's going to go on.
Well, and you mentioned that Burks is 32. That is 10 years older than Sasser, so there could be some weighted out kind of aspect to it. It's interesting because like Detroit and then Houston like Rockets guys ourselves are like looking at this like they're kind of at the same like flipping that switch. Okay, we've done the rebuilding thing for a couple years. Now it's like, do you play the guy that's in his 30s and like expect to win, or do you take the lumps that come with developing the guy in the early 20s? I'll be interested to see how they finagle that with Marcus back and forth. Marcus's freshman year when they went to the Final Four, he did not start the year as a starter and kind of worked his way in the lineup by mid-season. As a whole, right, you're talking about a guy that was like the 399th ranked recruit out of high school. Like he is, notoriously a hardworking guy that's worked his way up. But I want to transition to the final segment and talk some about what Detroit is looking at in the next season. Because you mentioned, Cade's extension eligible fairly soon, I imagine. Monty Williams is a winning coach, not a development coach. It appears to be kind of high. I guess correct me if I'm wrong there. What do you think the expectations are in Detroit? And then obviously as a Houston person, how does Sasser fit into those expectations? Or does a guy like Sasser fit in those expectations?
So before I answer, I do want to say this real quick. I should have mentioned this about Sasser. One of the things that may get him onto the floor immediately, one of the main reasons why they drafted him because they needed a point of attack defender. They have some good defenders in Killian Hayes, but I don't expect him to play. But he's more of a off-ball team defender. He can play point of attack, but he's more of he uses his size against bigger guys, gets active in the passing lanes of rotations and stuff. But they've lacked like a point of attack guy to really lock down dribble drives. And that's something that Sasser is going to be good at. So if he's good enough in that department, if they're really suffering at the point of attack, that could get him on the floor instantly. So that could be his best way to trying to separate himself from a Monty Morris, a Burks, or wherever else he slides in the rotation. That could be his best bet at really solidifying himself and separating himself. But as far as upside and expectations for next year, I think that when you say expectations, my expectations for Sasser and the Pistons upside would be that the Pistons trade Burks at the deadline or in December. That opens up minutes for Sasser. And Sasser is able to step in, replace what Burks brings, and helps the Pistons try to win like 35 games. I think that would be like my expectations for Sasser. That's what I would do if I was the GM of the Pistons. I'd play Burks first few months of the season, then continue to show his value, then flip him for a few seconds, or maybe if you could somehow finagle a late round first or somehow. I don't think you can do that. But if you could get a few seconds from a contender for him, do that because you already have his replacement in the wings, and then bring Sasser up halfway through the year when you feel like he's more ready. He understands the NBA a little bit more. He's been able to practice against some guys, and you bring him in halfway through the season. He plays well, and he helps the Pistons have a really big jump from where they were last year, which was 17 wins. That would be my expectations for, it was tough.
No, I'm sorry. Rockets were not much better. I don't mean to chuckle. I'm sorry. That was a very knee-jerky. But
it was bad. It deserves everything. It deserves every kind of response.
I would point out that Marcus has won a lot more than 17 games each year he's been in college, and they play a much shorter season. Like that was where I was knee jerking.
It's tough. It was one of the worst, if not the worst, season in Pistons history. It was bad. It was bad. So, and Cade was out. So hopefully, with Cade coming back and then some of the other improvements, the hope is that if Cade was actually playing this past season, obviously they wouldn't have won 17 games. Maybe they would have won like 22 games or something. Maybe Cade would have been worth 5 wins. So now a jump from 22 to 34 isn't doubling your win total. It's just like a 10 to 11 game increase, right? So that's like the hope. I think Sasser can contribute to that if they move off of Burks, because I do think his point of attack defense could be needed desperately in a team that needs defense. Their defense last year made me want to puke. It was bad. So I think he could help in that department, but they have to move off of Burks. And then the overall upside for the Pistons is I think they could potentially fight for a play-in spot if everything broke right. But everything would have to break right for them to do that, I think, because a lot of the teams in the Eastern Conference that were expected to maybe blow it up and kind of restart did not do so. And a lot of the young teams at the bottom of the conference are kind of in the same spot as the Pistons and will be battling the same kind of thing. So I think their highest ceiling is fighting for the play-in, but I expect them to be around 33 to 35 wins. I think that would be a really good season. I think Sasser could help them do it if they move off of Burks. I after watching him in Summer League, I'm not as high on his ability to read a defense and make like the right pass out of it. but him as a scorer, he creates a lot of separation on his dribble moves in isolation. He knows how to create separation really well on his step backs, his side steps, his what's the word I'm looking for? I forget the move, but he's a very creative, isolated player. In the summer league, he didn't have any problem creating separation for himself to score. It was just a matter of whether he was hitting the shots or not. And then in the final game, you saw he was finally hitting the shots, and it was like, oh, this dude's way too good for summer league. It's just like he's way too good for this. So I think that there's a role for him that can help the team immediately. It just, are they going to move off of Burks or not? That's my only hang up.
Well, and I would encourage other Locked On Coogs fans to check into Locked On Pistons, especially when Marcus is playing well. And it's a good listen. I listened to the one right after he had 41 points, and so I kind of know this story. But for the listener at home and my audience that doesn't know this story, tell us about your reaction to him scoring 41 points, because that's kind of a funny evening.
So it was the final game of summer league. I see that Sar is not playing, and one of my friends is a assistant coach at my old high school that I graduated from. So he gets to open up the gym and for all of us, and we go up and we play pickup together. So I see Asar's not playing. I see a lot of dudes aren't playing. And I'm like, you know what? It's summer league. Asar is like the ticket, whatever. It's the last game of the summer league. People aren't going to be playing in this. I'm not interested.
And to be fair, Marcus had not shot the ball well to that point.
Right,
so it's not like you're looking for him either.
Right. So I was like, you know what? If anything happens, I can just rewatch some stuff when I get home if it really is like something else happens or whatever. But I'm going to go hoop. So I go and hoop. I'm playing pickup, whatever. I come to my phone after we're done playing. I tweet out like, okay, what is there anything happening in like the Pistons game? Like, did anything like did I miss anything? I just start getting spammed. Sasser has 35 right now. Oh no, he just hit another 3. He has 40. He has 41. I'm like, bro, what? Like, what did I just miss? Of course. The one time I don't watch a game, summer league game, I watch every game. I watch everything. Summer league game, I think I can take off. It's the final summer league. I can go have, a little fun time with the boys. I find I miss a 40 piece from Sasser. Everyone's just spamming me with Sasser's balling. Sasser's going crazy.
Hey, did I miss anything?
and boy, did I miss something. I missed a pretty big thing. The crazy thing is too, is that at halftime of that game, like it was in between a game on one of our pickup games. So I tweet out, I go and look, and I was like, doesn't look like I'm missing too much. Hopefully, something happens, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna go back to this pickup session. And I come back to that tweet a little bit later when I came back after the pickup session. They were like, hey, from now on, tweet like negative stuff and like tweet that like things aren't going right from now on. Because as soon as you tweeted that, Sasser like basically did not miss in the second half. I think he went 10 of 11 in the second half, made almost every shot he took. It was just like, I went back and watched obviously every shot he took because he was the only one on the floor I was really too interested in at that point. So I went back and like followed each shot attempt, each possession. He had the ball in his hands, and he was on fire the second half. He didn't even start off shooting well either. I think he started off 2 of 7 in the game, and then just like turned into like the Human Torch in the second half. Like, it was crazy. But it was cool to see because throughout the summer league, he wasn't hitting his shots, but he was creating separation on a lot of them. You can see how he's a good. I think he's going to be a good isolation scorer. I really like the separation he gets, but he just wasn't hitting shots. So you saw that stuff. But once he started hitting shots, it was like, that's all that was missing. Once he started hitting, it was like, yeah, this dude's too good for summer league. Like, he was playing with them in the second half of that game. Like, it was just like it was bad.
It's gonna be a ton of fun. I hope he does that a couple more times. I mean, 40 pieces would be nice at Marcus Sasser. I'm Parker Ainsworth. That's Cookie Hill. You can find me at Painsworth 512. It's PAINSWRTH 512. Cookie Hill is just first name, last name, right, all together on Twitter. I gotta ask. I'm trying to find things that are not Twitter. What else are you on these days?
Really, to be honest, it really is just Twitter. I'd be on Twitter at Cougar Hill and then on YouTube at Locked On Pistons. That's really it. I know I probably should change that with, what's going on with Twitter. They might be going down in the dumps soon, so I might have to change that up. But as of right now, that's all I'm at.
We're still calling it Twitter, though. So that's what
I'm not calling it X. What is it? What, X? Is that what he's trying to call it? Like,
no, we're calling it Twitter. Thanks to everybody. We say go Cougs. Go Cougs.